Okay. Yeah, perhaps another interesting thing I've discovered is that you can use your mobile phone and all its functions as components to robots. Now, here's one of the devices that allows you to do that. It comes from Egypt. It's called OneShield Plus. And what it does, it maps everything on your phone to the Arduino IDE. And that's quite interesting because you can very rapidly prototype and construct from the very simple to complicated things like using the phone's video system to do recognition. Okay, so there's one. We might do a demo on that one time, but it's quite easy to use. But what it does, it allows you to use your old mobile phone as part of your robot laboratory. Okay, well, we might resume. I might set the timer again. I might just introduce my little timer. It's called Timer, and it's an example of technology which is used for autistic kids. Okay, autistic kids are good graphically, but they can understand visual concepts, but they don't understand the numbers that are around here. So my son, when I say you've got 10 minutes to do that, he himself will actually set the time, and that will clock down. I think we've got about 20 minutes. So I'll be using it myself. Okay, a drone. Well, this is pretty new technology for me, and I'm not really a qualified pilot. I've only had about 2 hours experience flying a drone, and I was hopeless to start with, chose completely the wrong locations, but I've got a lot more confidence now. And on Saturday, I tried with my son Jason, and he was able to put the drone together. Even after it crash land, he could put the blades back in. So, you know, within about, say, 2 hour instruction, we were able to use it quite effectively. And we did all this indoors, which is not really advisable. Okay, so what is a drone? Well, it's a unmanned aerial vehicle. And according to the Australian law, which has just changed fairly recently, it's now, they define it as a remotely piloted aircraft. So it's really an aeroplane that doesn't have a human being as a pilot on board. But it really, at the moment, most drones have a remote pilot. So that's really the difference. And it really needs two components together with a communication system between them. One component is the handheld controller, and the other one is the actual drone vehicle itself, UAV. Now, what's interesting about the programming side of this is that most drones don't allow you to reprogram the software within the drone itself. They reprogram the handheld controller. Okay, so all the products that are on the market will vary in the way that they can support that. Now, what would be nice if the manufacturers released a communications protocol between the two different components. And when they've done that, there is often more and more apps that come out for both Android and for Apple so that you can get other apps to control your drone. So one company called Parrot, they've done that. But unfortunately, the one that I just showed you, they've chosen for the first time in their whole product line to go closed. And that's quite disappointing because if it was open sourced, it would be able to extend its functions. Okay, drones can come in all sorts of sizes these days. Big ones for the military, and the other one is a tiny little drone called a Pico drone. So they can actually be big and small. And they can work as a single unit, or they can work in a swarm. And they actually have some interesting behavior when you actually put them together in a swarm. The sizes can also, you can classify that according to the number of blades that they use. So the most popular one is either the quad or the hex configuration. And actually, I've got one of each on the table to show you. So I've illustrated so far only one drone, which is Airblock. The other drone, which is a really small one, is a quad arrangement, and it's called Crazy Fly. Now, Crazy Fly is a totally different package. It's used by many, many universities in aeronautics for teaching undergrads, and you can get your PhD on it if you can think of the right problem. So the University of Southern California, they've got a YouTube that shows you how they're using Crazy Fly with about 100 little drones, all working in swarm configuration. Okay, what would you use drones for? Did anyone see the ABC news last night? How they're using drones in agriculture? Just near Newcastle. So drones there are actually being used for reforestation, which is really difficult to do in slopes and other locations. So they're beginning to make quite a breakthrough. And when you think of, well, what are my kids going to do in the future? I think we had a talk about that earlier tonight. You sort of think of it, well, perhaps there are new opportunities for some of this technology. And even if your kid's got the pilot's license, that would be a good starting point, because drone pilots will definitely be in demand. So they can be used in lots and lots of areas. If I was back in the RTA, we actually had a helicopter to control the traffic, and that was back in the 1980s. Today we'd be using drones. And one of the projects I had for the Olympic Games was to connect all the TV cameras in New South Wales back to the Transport Management Centre. Even though I had a couple of hundred TV cameras, I still didn't have enough. And today I'd be using a drone to actually supplement that, because you don't know, traffic incidents don't happen where the cameras are. Okay, so yeah, I'd definitely be using drones today. One of the other projects I worked on was the health of bridges, because there's a concern we can build a bridge today, but will it last? And you could use drones to inspect the bridges, particularly when today it's been reported in the Sydney Morning Herald that we don't carry out enough inspections of our railway bridges. I think we don't have enough information. I know, as an engineer, I'd be negotiating, so I'd be going to both ACMA and also the Department of Civil. Yeah, I'd be negotiating for a role there. Yeah, lots of state governments are using drones now, so it's only a matter of, well, let's get in and do it. So some of the interesting parts there are you can get involved with drone racing, join a club, and it's another way to have a bit of fun with drones. Making movies, I think one of the latest movies, or quite a few recent movies are using drones to cut down the cost of making those movies. Yep. So they've got a role there. Amazon, and delivering all sorts of things. And we're beginning to use them on our beaches now for sharks, looking at sharks. So there's a lot of uses for them. And they're really part of this whole new way of thinking about autonomous things. You know, when I started UTS, there was an outcry because my boss there, Chris Peterson, he wanted to actually put in a monorail which didn't have a driver. And what an outrage there was in the press about that. And eventually, they removed the computer and put a driver in there. And it changed the whole business plan for the monorail. And it was doomed because not enough people could go in there, and it wasn't going to make money. But what a change today. We're all going to get our first trains, which are driverless, and it's a whole new pattern of how society is changing. It's quite interesting because it's not only just the technology, but it's also society's expectations of how we might use that technology, and are we ready for it or not? We certainly weren't with the monorail. Okay, now for Airblock. So I participated in a Kickstarter project in August last year, and my units have just been delivered. So I've had about 6 weeks to play with it. What I did was to commission it, but I also wanted to reflect on, well, how could you use this in education? So Airblock is an entry-level drone. So you'd use it particularly in primary schools, perhaps the upper primary school level, and you don't need a license. That's a good thing. You don't need. It's really for recreation. I guess recreation and education. You can fly it indoors and outside, and it's quite suitable for K to 12. It's almost ready to fly. 30 seconds of construction time, you've got a drone. So it doesn't take too much effort to put it together. And it's reconfigurable. That's probably one of the first drones that I've seen that actually can be reconfigurable like that. The other good thing is it's programmable. So you can actually have your own flight plans, and it will do all sorts of tricks. We'll have a look at that in a minute. And the kit also comes with spares, and you definitely will need those. And there's some of the configurations that I've put together. So it has two modules. One is the core module, and the other one is the blade module. And that's all there is. You just put those together. And it uses, to try and reduce the weight, foam material that in the first instance you think, oh, that looks a bit cheap, but there is a reason for doing that. And part of the reason is to protect the blades and to protect you. I've already had one little accident. You think something like that wouldn't cause any damage, but if you put your fingers into the motor, it will cause a little bit of damage. And if you actually look at it, quite innovative in the construction. And the benefit for you is this construction allows you to put it together very, very quickly using magnets, and the electrical connections are already there. So something that is really complicated has been simplified in construction. Kickstarter, well, what's interesting about that, their goal was only $100,000. And they ended up getting $830,000, which is really amazing in terms of what they aimed for, what their intentions were, and what happened. And partly the delay was a result that there was too many people ordering them. So 7,000 people ordered, and they were months late in the delivery. So, yeah, we'll cover the numbers there. The construction, this is Jason putting it together. So it's quite easy, and all you have to do is just check the orientation. And for flying, I prefer using the iPad, but it works okay with an Android. I find that you're probably better off with a drone that has a joystick, because you get distracted when you're interacting with the iPad and you're tending to look, oh, where is the controls? Whereas with the joystick, you've already got your finger there and you maintain optimal line of sight. You don't do that with an iPad. So if you're starting off in this area, and I knew nothing about it, there are really two phases. The construction programming is totally different from learning. I thought I could fly a drone within 5 seconds, and it didn't work out that way at all. That phase of learning how to fly the drone is a definite phase on its own. And with Jason, this is Jason's first experiences with the drone, and he's very sensitive to sound. So he was able to get used to it eventually, but his initial reaction, and this is something that you need to, as a parent or a teacher, be prepared for. Some of the kids will actually be a bit frightened of it, but with the right introduction, you need to be prepared for things like that. It was also harder for me too, because I was paying attention to Jason. Nobody was paying attention to the controls. And what do you think happened? Didn't take too long before it crashed. So there's our first run, and it crashed in the blinds. So my wife kicked me out. She said, then I went to the garden, and it was a little bit better, but it actually cut through the trees as it crash landed, cut through the foam. And with a bit of super glue, I was able to repair that. But you're far better off going to the local park. And there, it's a good idea to know what you can do legally. And what I did was to map the local area, and this would be a really interesting exercise for kids to do too. Find out, well, what am I allowed to do in terms of distance, and how far do I have to keep away from people? So what's interesting about the law, it says nothing about flying a drone indoors, but if I was to go outside, I'd be breaking the law right now and repeating what I just did. One is I can't fly a drone at night, and second of all, I must keep about 30 metres away from other people. But you know, those aspects of the law, the contextual aspects, quite important in the teaching and the learning. And you get the kids to find out, what does the law say? And is the law vague about it? So you'll find right now there's a Senate inquiry into drones, because not only has the bill been amended in September last year, but that's not the end of it. Okay, the other thing is you can take measurements. I've brought some instruments for weighing the drone, and you can actually find out whether you've got enough battery power. So you can actually do an assessment of your flight plan and get the kids to actually map it out. And while they're doing that, they can learn a little bit of trigonometry and navigation. Okay, so that's the drone. We've just seen the drone in the other configuration, which is hovercraft mode. And this is Jason putting it together. The only difference is that there's some extra propeller guides to try and guard you against putting your fingers in that particular mode. And so it was ready to fly. And once I got it configured correctly, it actually took off quite well. Lots of software available, and the software is in the same family as the MakeBlock series of software. So instead of choosing from their app, the MBot, you choose Airblock, and the rest of the programming is the same. So we've already heard tonight about graphical programming and Scratch. Well, it's quite similar. The programs that are available allow you to do all sorts of things. So there's a predefined configuration that helps you start off with, but you can then modify all of these little widgets and add programming code to them. And there's the example. We've seen Scratch already, so it's the same sort of thing. I actually did a couple of hours of this and got quite sick of it. Now, from an experienced programmer's point of view, it actually lacks one important concept, and that is it doesn't have a concept of library. And what I would like to do, if my iPad failed, I would like to use perhaps another parent's iPad. You can't do that because it won't allow you to save your configuration, and you could spend perhaps an hour putting the program together. It will save the configuration in your iPad, but you can't save it into someone else's iPad, which I think is a bit of an oversight. And also modules. It doesn't have the concept of libraries where you can say, well, I'm going to use that little widget sometime in the future. So you've got to go and repeat all the programming steps again. So I think that it might be defeating the purpose in terms of some of the really good kids might get a bit bored with it. does introduce some programming concepts, and I think the same thing happens with Scratch. You can't put Scratch into libraries, but it would be really good if you could. But you can actually do quite a lot of interesting things. Get into all the sensors. You can do things like that last slide. You can turn it into a data acquisition system and plot out. It'll show you the graph of the gyroscope. All the sensors, you can actually plot them out. I thought that was quite cool. Okay, so just as finally, it's an innovative product. There's no doubt about that. Multiple applications. It can work indoors, but if you're a school teacher and you've got access to the gym, that's much better. If you pick a nearby park, you'll find, and I've only just looked at this today, the Bluetooth communications is really very poor. So you lose control after about 8 meters, which is not very good. Even if you were an engineer designing with Bluetooth version 4, you've got different classes you could have picked. They picked the worst one. So if they did it and it had, say, 30 meters, and you can do that with Bluetooth, that would have just made it work. But I think as a product, it's probably failed because they didn't engineer the Bluetooth configuration correctly. Now, saying that, I personally think they're waiting, and Texas Instruments have just released today, this week, their first kits for Bluetooth 5, and the performance on Bluetooth 5 is far better for devices like this. Okay, so the bad things are, it's pretty hard to remove the battery. I've been onto their website and I've had discussions with them about that. They say, well, if you put it in the swimming pool, it's got to be watertight. So that's one reason. But you do struggle taking the battery out. The programming, it lacks a bit of support. And if you're going to buy anything like that, check out the website on support very thoroughly. And if you look at it, it actually laps. And a lot of Chinese sites are like this. They don't really have a good wiki, or they don't have programming support. Now, compare that, say, with SparkFun or the traditional American STEM resources. You'll find that there's a big difference in support. I personally think they only really planned it for a Kickstarter, and that's it. They've made their money, and that's beginning to happen quite a lot with Kickstarter projects. Yeah, they're a one-off. Is it overpriced? It cost me $99 for one, so I got 2 of them. I needed spares, and luckily enough, you can't buy the spares, so they gave us an extra battery, so I've now got 4 batteries, and that's what you need if you're going to do something decent. There's no camera, and there's a lot you can do with a camera in photography and so on. There's also a brand new technique which some of the companies are using called Optical Flow. An Optical Flow does a pattern recognition of the ground just below you. So if you buy an expensive drone, about $800 or so, it might have this feature that can help you land and recognize where it started from. So some of those extra features, if you buy a drone around about $800 and it has GPS and return to base, it's much easier to fly than these other ones. Okay, so I would recommend it. If you're a beginner, it might be okay, and particularly if you want to do a bit of coding, just a little bit. It's okay for an early age group, long as there's good supervision. And you do need to be careful of the safety. Things like batteries. What happens if your batteries are thrashed all the time? We've all heard what happens with some lithium polymer batteries. Well, I think it's still uncharted territory when we're coming to review some of that. So I would take precautions by putting your spare batteries into a proper storage bag. And perhaps the other thing is with the law, if you fly unsafe, then you're actually breaking the law. And what's interesting, if you go and code your drone to do all sorts of fancy tricks, but there's a software bug in it, that's negligence. And there's an aspect of that where if you're programming, there's a degree of responsibility to make sure that other people are protected. Now, technology like this puts you right in that frame. You've got to think about those sort of aspects. Okay, you should do a bit of research before you begin to invest it and think that this is good technology. And I think this is part of, I'd involve the kids themselves in planning the expenditure. What's the best drone for your class? Have a look, involve them. Don't just give them the drone, but perhaps compare alternatives and let them be the decision makers too. And get help. If you're really keen on it, you go and join a model aircraft club. There's one 2 kilometres away from where I live. I didn't know that before. And you'll find plenty of people who've got lots and lots of experience. The other thing about that is that if you do pay the membership, that will cover your insurance if something goes wrong. So you need to think about risks and liability. There are plenty of alternatives, and we haven't got time tonight to actually look at Crazy Fly 2, but Crazy Fly 2 allows you, it's totally open source, to get right into the drone and do some really interesting things. Some of the other ones I've looked at, like Parrot, I think they're good value for money, and they come with software development kits that you can reprogram the handheld controllers. And we've mentioned safety and the law. We've looked at that already. I don't think we've got time to do this extensively, but I've done a mind map which maps educational issues with using drones. And if anyone's interested in this, I'm very happy to give them a copy of my mind map that goes into the mapping in detail. Just a very quick area. Even things like literacy, journalism, teamwork, students working together to construct the drone, different roles. One can be a spotter, the other one can take different roles. All of that can be included in the projects that kids do. And right through to chemistry, physics. The chemistry, I've already mentioned the battery. Well, you could mention the risks and what lithium polymer batteries are and what the chemistry behind that is. With maths, there are plenty of resources that look at matrix maths, vectors, and mapping, and looking at that in the context of drones. Okay, so I think I might leave it at that, and I'm welcome any feedback at all, and I'm happy to share any resources that I've learnt myself if you want to take this further. Are there any questions? 7 minutes on your one. Okay, it's not very long, and you do need to have spare batteries. On that one, you lose Bluetooth control really quickly. There are limits. You're not allowed to go much more than 120 metres, 121 metres. So that's illegal. It won't go up there. But the wind will push it up there. And it's really, it can get out of control outdoors. Yeah, you can lose sight. So it's good to have someone else appointed as a spotter, and you'll get plenty of physical exercise running after it. Yep. No. You will get warning that your battery level on your iPad is going down, and you then have to bring it back to a safe landing condition. But, you know, there are all sorts of things that you could explore as school projects. One thing is that it would be great to identify whether it's out of range. So you could have a chatting session in the protocol which would, if it's out of range, it would automatically land rather than just continue on. So there's a lot of improvements you could make to it if they opened up that protocol. Yeah, that's a big point. If you've got, how much money have you got? If you've got, say, about the Rolls-Royce, in my opinion, is a brand called DJI, and one of their best drones, you can program the whole lot, but it has additional compartments for batteries. And if you add the additional batteries, you can get up to 70 minutes, which is quite amazing for a drone to have 70 minutes flying time. That's the best. And that will cost you $3,500 US. Yeah, I think Mavic and the Matrix 100, they're totally programmable drones. And so very good software development. The company behind that, they're encouraging competitions. So there are yearly competitions and get-togethers that make it even more competitive. Well, in some sense, with autonomous systems, this is what you're doing. I'll give you an example. With the Crazy Fly, it has a QI charger, and you can actually make it come back and recharge itself. So it doesn't even need someone to recharge the battery. So you can do things like that. The idea with the totally programmable ones, they can become more and more autonomous. It's a degree of which way you go. Yeah, you can do. Yep. Yep. You could do something like that. That could be. Yep. Yep. Checking the state of your gutters, things like that, the state of your solar panels. There's a lot of things you could probably do. I would think that in 5 years or so, there'll be more things that will come out for the home. At the moment, I wouldn't like to send my drone up to the roof because I'm sure it would fly off to the neighbour's property. Yep. The more expensive drones with GPS and other navigational aids are very good today at returning back, and they don't tend to get lost. They also, unlike this drone, they optimize either the Wi-Fi or the Bluetooth communication, or they go beyond that to give you a much extended range. I don't know how DJI do it, but they can go up to 7 kilometres. And I don't think they've got special ACMA approval from Australia. So, yeah, there's a lot of very interesting things that you can squeeze in with technology to get a little bit more out of it. But you're paying more for that. Yep. Yeah, at my house, I've got a closed-circuit TV for my pool, and it will identify if the kids next door jump into the pool. I get a warning about that. But I agree, it would be better to have it with a drone. But the drone's also got a degree of unreliability. So I'm not sure if at this stage for really safe devices that I would go for a drone solution. Okay. Good. Thank you.
We have run out of time, and so thanks for coming tonight, and hope to see you at the next meetup. Thanks.